presume it's Alex. Oh, they're gone. I don't know.
The only other thing I could think of is it might be the person from the land trust.
Oh yeah, here's Linda. Yes. I will, I guess Linda can hear us now. So Linda, I'm going to make you a panelist because these are kind of informal, but technically these are public meetings that are recorded. So, I'm going to promote you to become a panelist now and, welcome you for posterity, I guess. So Linda, you should have a pop-up on your screen that invites you to be a panelist.
There we are.
And I think you're still muted, but welcome. So Alex did say he was good for this. Let's make sure he's not emailing me. So I would expect he'll be here in a minute, but maybe here he is now.
Yes.
All right, we're here.
Everybody. Do I have to be official about?
Oh, so you can just say that this is a meeting and we're starting.
So this is a subcommittee of the Amherst Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. This is the education subcommittee. It is Friday, April 4th at 9:16, and we are called to order.
Great, welcome. And I see Maura is in the audience here too. And I don't know if is Maura here on behalf of the ACLT, in which case maybe I should promote her as well, or we can.
Yes, please.
Yes.
So I don't have a formal agenda right in front of me, but I know we had invited the Community Land Trust to come talk about possibly doing some sort of education or outreach or webinar together. And so I'd like to honor their time and have them go first, and then we can go through our other updates, if that's okay.
Great.
So welcome, Linda and Maura.
Thank you for having us.
Just in case we haven't met before, and Alex is with us as well, and Greg, obviously. So I guess one of the things that came out of our strategic planning was trying to be more focused in some of the education and outreach events that we did, and trying to kind of hold more of them as well. So Alex and I had identified the Land Trust as possibly a good partnership to hopefully maybe host some sort of, this is what you guys are up to now, and raise more awareness about what you were doing, especially as we try and think about different ways than just developing new units, to make affordable housing an option for people in town. So welcome, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're up to and how you think we could partner.
Well, thank you very much for thinking of us. This comes at a very good moment for us, actually. We've been going for 10 years now and kind of pottering along, adding one home and one family at a time. And suddenly last fall, 4 families came forward to invite us to at least consider with them whether their homes could become part of our portfolio. In every case, that would involve the family walking away from some part of accumulated value. I mean, the manifestation of generosity has just been stunning. But it also, from a point of view of the organization, felt like, we'd been going along kind of like this, and suddenly we were expected to operate, due diligence on 4 properties kind of immediately. So it's been an exciting moment. We also have been sort of quietly accumulating enough resources that we could manage at least a half-time staff person. We've been totally volunteer from the time that we started. So all that we've presently accomplished, we've done with no staff at all. And we really are outgrowing that. There needs to be someone whose day job, at least partially, is to mind the store. And so we've launched a search. We're just still in the interview process. And again, I've just been really heartened by, we advertised that it was 20 hours a week, and we sort of hoped that that would fit for somebody with appropriate skills. And we got 17 applicants, any one of whom I would have been happy to have had come forward and say they were willing to give this a try. So now we're involved in a difficult choice process to actually choose one of them and respectfully communicate with the ones not chosen that it's no lack of, value on their part. So it's just, as I say, it couldn't have been a better moment to invite us to tell the story a little more publicly. And I hope that's useful to the trust work to have that be more visible. I'm curious, the forum that you hosted recently with the League of Women Voters for the developers, that was just very helpful to us. Again, a fortuitous moment to have the public reminded of what it costs to produce these units and the various ways they can be thought about. So we are delighted to have the opportunity to discuss being part of such a forum.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I did reach out to the League of Women Voters to say, would you be willing to partner again on some sort of perhaps differently focused forum? And they said absolutely. So that would be, I think, a helpful resource to have in terms of advertising and, getting the word out and having people show up to it. If that's the direction that we choose to go in, which I hope it is.
So we have given a little bit of thought to what we might present. And one of the things occurred to me, but as I was just pulling a few things together for this meeting, we would be delighted if this focused wholly on ACLT, but there is the option. There are other organizations that we've tended to appear with before, including this one, but obvious ones would be Habitat and Valley CDC, although both of them cover a greater region. One of the unique things about ACLT, as about your organization, is that it really is totally focused on Amherst. So I'm just curious whether you've thought about, again, we'd be happy to be front and center. There's certainly plenty to think about to take up an hour of people's time. But it didn't feel right to just go forward and kind of lay out, well, here are all the wonderful things we could talk about without acknowledging that particularly we've worked very directly with Habitat and Valley CDC. We'd have been dead in the water without them as partners in the early days.
Well, I hadn't given it much thought. I guess, I know Valley CDC was included in our last forum, and I don't necessarily think it would be
makes sense.
Bad idea to have them, but I think maybe if it was more focused on, Habitat and the land trust, that might be a place to start, just because I think, again, there are different ways that they operate than, I understand Valley CDC is nonprofit, but it's still a developer in a sense where we're talking about new units being built, as with Habitat, but there's kind of a different model there. So that might be, Alex, do you have any thoughts on maybe having like a Habitat and Community Land Trust or inviting CDC as well, or?
Honestly, I think I need a little more time to think about it, to see what I think that event would look like in my head. Greg, it looked like you had something to say.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to maybe ask a focusing question, and there may not be an answer to this yet, which is fine, but whether or not anyone's given thought, sort of putting a kind of like a functional communications lens on it of like who, what a target audience might be, and I think that might help, like what a target audience is, and what our hope is for them to do, is sometimes even a more specific way to look at it. So I mean, that could be sort of, the general populace of Amherst get involved with ACLT and homeownership initiatives, or it could be, it could be prospective homeowners, or it could be existing homeowners. I mean, I think sort of maybe focusing on, and of course, like, you kind of frame out a target audience, and then maybe you succeed in getting that, and then layer on more folks, and it's usually fine. If someone's not quite in your target demographic, that's, I think, community events always like include layers, but I think sometimes it can be helpful to define that, to sort of focus, to kind of reverse engineer, what the content and the participants are.
Maura, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I think ACLT has traditionally focused on, like, I don't know how to put it, neighborhoods where they feel under threat from houses being bought up by developers. And so because we deal with houses that are already built, for the most part, a couple of the Habitat ones were new, and one of our new projects will probably involve some new construction. But the emphasis is on preserving neighborhoods and providing home ownership for people who might not otherwise be able to afford it. So I think it's a pretty broad demographic that we would want to appeal to, since that is a big topic in town whenever housing comes up. Neighborhoods kind of feel under threat sometimes from the university.
So I guess in terms of thinking about, our mission, which is making sure that people can get into affordable housing and stay there, it seems like it would be helpful, almost like to match a prospective home donator to the land trust, and then also let the general public who might be looking for housing to know about this, and again, I don't know how you are matched with families that are interested in then purchasing so I think there's a lot that goes. So maybe it'd be helpful to hear from you what your thoughts are about what you could present, and if that helps kind of clarify whether it would be, I'm glad that you brought up Habitat, because I hadn't even thought about that recently, but maybe that is something that down the road we would have a different kind of conversation with Habitat, or if there's, I'll let you talk because I'm talking in circles.
Well, I was making a very similar segue in my mind as the conversation went around, that just some storytelling about our existing homes and the ones that are in the offing would expose exactly the issues of what kinds of people we're dealing with. Where do the homes come from, and where do the buyers come from? And we had a tidy view of that when we started. And now that we have 7 families in homes and 4 potential new ones, the view is just broadened hugely. I had a fantasy at one time that we would cultivate awareness of a set of homes and catch them before the family actually, and put them on the public market, which immediately takes 6% of the value out for the marketing and sale effort. And that we would have a set of people patiently waiting for an opportunity. Well, of course, people's lives, if they really need to do something, they aren't still on the list after a while. But I still think having that in the background is valuable. But let me just tell you a couple of the stories, just briefly, so you can begin to see how we might present this. first of all, the very first project we did was a partnership with Habitat. We were very new at the time. We didn't know how to handle the public money. If a project is funded with public funds, and our first funds came from the Community Preservation Act, then immediately kicks in place a whole set of state regulations about how you recruit beneficiaries. And they have to approve literally every marketing piece. You can't put a handout up on the bulletin board at Whole Foods without they've approved the language in it as appropriately equitable. And we needed to learn all that. And so it was a real gift to us that we were able to get CPA money to buy a piece of property, to partner with Habitat, which took on all the parts that we didn't know how to do yet, how to do home ownership training. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes with that they had into a settled routine. So they built the first 2 homes, and we learned as we went along. And since then, about half of the properties we've added have been with public money. We got another allocation of CPA funds, which allowed us to provide $125,000 subsidy to each of 2 families. And at the time that kicked into place, right as the pandemic was beginning, $125,000 was pretty close to the value of most parcels of land in the areas in Amherst that we were working in. So it made sense to say, well, we'll put up enough to purchase the land, and the homeowner only has to come up with the cost of the home. As things actually unfolded, by the second family, the first family that won the lottery for that, and the lottery was managed by Valley CDC. That's why I have so valued their partnership. Again, we still weren't set up to do the qualifying of people, and they again had experience with dealing with potential new homeowners and knowing what the state regulations were about equitable presentation of the opportunity and verifying that people were in the income group that made them eligible and running the lottery. The first family that won the lottery, within like 3 or 4 days of being notified, had the last affordable home in Amherst, by which I mean the last one for which a subsidy of $125,000, together with what they could bring to the table, was enough to get them in. The second family chosen in the lottery looked for 18 months and eventually had to resign their access to the lottery because the prices were rising all literally week by week and month by month. And I am not exaggerating when I say the first family that got their hands on the subsidy got the last home in Amherst, where $125,000 was enough to close the gap between what a family at 80% AMI could bring to the table and what a home in Amherst cost, even a fixer-upper. So eventually, we get to kind of the next phase of the story, which is the gifts began to appear. The first major gift occurred when our founding president, Maurianne Adams, passed away. She left us her whole property, that is the house, the land, and $150,000 because she knew that the home needed work. It was a home built in the late 19th century, and although she'd been living in it until just weeks before she passed, she knew that it needed things to be brought up to sort of what we think of as Habitat standards. I picked up in the early days with Habitat on their sense of what's an appropriate home for a modest income family, which is that it doesn't look luxurious, but it's built to a very high standard technically. It has a super high R value. The electricity is all as modern as you can get it, and that kind of thing. And so making those conversions in a home where Maurianne had just been cheerfully paying totally outrageous utility bills, that took some investment. But when finally all of that was done, then one of the families that had in fact won the subsequent run of the lottery for our first CPA batch, this story occurs in loops. When they saw Maurianne's home and the neighborhood that it was in, which is a cul-de-sac, they had 3 young children, and they had been looking at things that they viewed much less suitable for having small children playing outside, and they just fell in love with it. So they resigned the subsidy in the interest of being able to buy Morianne's house. And that yielded, they paid an affordable price for that home, which was $200,000. Now we had $200,000 in the bank, and still a live subsidy, which we hadn't used, an allocation of CPA funds. So we upped that subsidy to $225,000, and that put another family in place. That was enough. That was how much the prices had risen in terms of the gap between what a family at 80% AMI could afford and what the simplest single family homes in Amherst were going for.
It also included the 25,000 from AMA.
From AMAHT, that's right. And we put in 75, and you folks happily put in the last 25. Thank you for that reminder. So in the meantime, another model of gift began to show up. So we now have a homeowner in place who has gifted us his land formally and is still resident in the home. And the relationship between ACLT and its homeowners is governed by a ground lease. So the homeowner is a special kind of homeowner. They're not just getting a windfall. They're buying into the concept that their home is going to be perpetually affordable, and that it's going to be owner occupied. So there are two critical elements of the ground lease. One is that the owner has to occupy the home. If their circumstances change so that they wish to live elsewhere, they have to sell it on, and they can sell it for not more than proportional rise in the area median income in the time that they were owners. So that home is always going to be available to a family at 80% of AMI. So the donor that's in place now, who's continuing to live in his home, obviously he doesn't need the subsidy. He has in fact gifted a great deal of the accumulated value of his property to us, because he lives as a homeowner under a ground lease. We set the base price that would make his home affordable at 80% AMI. And that's the base in his ground lease. So he, if he leaves while he's still alive, or his heirs, can charge not more than the base price in his ground lease times the proportional rise in area median income since he signed it. So we have models in place now where the money allocated by the town, by CPA or by AMAHT, has enabled a purchase, and we have a case where there was a gift of the whole property outright, including some cash, and we have a case where the owner has gifted the land while they're still in place. And then one other model of gift, we had a family come forward, an older couple who lived in a home that would be a classic starter home on Logtown Road, and they were eventually successful enough financially that they could afford a home with more land around it. I'm talking about Claude Tellier and Ruth Hazard. I don't know if any of you have come across them. Ruth taught vegetable agriculture for many years at the university. She was the faculty member, maybe a staff member, but within University Extension, she was a guiding light to people growing food locally for a long time. And they always wanted a property where Ruth could really be expansive herself. And the property on Logtown Road, although it's a nice home, had big trees and not much space for a serious vegetable garden. So they eventually bought the land adjoining the North Amherst Community Farm, in which they had been active members, and were using the home on Logtown Road as a rental. So they came forward again voluntarily, just appeared one day in our sites and wanted to know if we wanted to partner with them. So they sold that home affordably to its then existing tenant, a single mom with one child, who could afford what the house cost, but could not have afforded the whole cost of the property. And again, the relationship is governed by a ground lease. So those are the models that we've seen so far. And they're kind of reflected in the 4 properties that we have in the hopper now. One of which is 174 Amity Street, a big old historic home being offered to us by the grandchildren of the family that lived there for decades in the early to middle 20th century. And they've been running it as a rental for a long time. They're getting older themselves, and they came forward. The granddaughter, particularly Deborah Gross, she actually came to the town and ended up speaking, among others, to Nate Malloy, and Nate sent her to us. So now we're talking about that this is very much in the due diligence phase. But the idea is that that home sits on a big enough piece of land to have an additional home, and the original building, which has already long ago been divided into 2-family space, could realistically be divided into a 3-family space, and an additional structure built. So that project is at the stage of discussing with Nate and others how we go about the special permit. So it would be a mixed project for us. If it happens as we hope, Habitat will partner with us and do the new build, and we will manage the renovation. But there's a lot of fundraising between here and there. Again, the family's agreement in coming to us is that they would accept half the market value of that property from us, with the thought that that would enable. It kind of sits across Amity Street from the very upmarket condos that were built into the old funeral home there. So it would create a lovely symmetry in my mind. Across Amity Street would be an equally carefully developed cluster of 5 homes that would be marketed affordably. But that's now we're into not quite pie in the sky. I certainly hope we pull it off, but very much a future project. So forgive me for monopolizing the conversation for that long, but that's kind of the narrative. And the question would be sort of which of the issues that you'd like to surface and the audience that should be reached. Does that prompt in your mind, would be drawn in, and what would be the most effective way to present it?
So I think hearing a little bit more about how you've collaborated and might continue to collaborate with at least Habitat, it seems like maybe it could be helpful to have them as part of the conversation. I mean, I think it's interesting to think about certain neighborhoods where it might be a more like a targeted model in a sense. I'm just thinking, could a model like this work in a place like Amherst Woods where the homes are already like not affordable at all? So, thinking in terms of gravitating towards people who might be in a place to either donate land or think about a way to donate their home, is that the target audience, or is it both those people and people who are interested in home ownership opportunities, who might have some patience and might have, seen how the market is going currently and had some struggles in finding a place to go.
The other project that we are currently working on that Linda didn't mention is an older person who was a longtime member of ACLT who now needed to go into more of an assisted living situation and wanted her house to go to a family. And so her family, correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, is her sons are willing to forfeit some of the profit, although she needs money to continue living, but forfeit some of that to sell directly to an ACLT family. And so I think they're being patient about it. They said within, a year to come up with, that we could come up with the money between what the family could afford. But the neighbors around there are fairly enthusiastic about raising money among themselves to help purchase that land, in that house. Also, Linda didn't mention that we recently received Community Development Corporation status, so that any donations of $1,000 or more to ACLT hopefully will receive a matching tax credit. And they haven't come out with those tax credit allocations yet for this year, but I think that's also an important development in our organization.
Yeah.
Alex, do you have any thoughts kind of hearing some of that?
I do, yeah. So I'm thinking back to something that I don't remember if it was yourself, Allegra, or Greg who mentioned this previously, but the idea of hosting an event that was more of a resource fair than anything. So you want to support affordable housing in Amherst, right? With a combination of so many interesting groups and committees and boards and nonprofits that all are plugged in different ways that work different ways. So in my head, this is still geared more towards people wanting to contribute, but not sure where to start. And this idea of, great, if something that you have to give is time, then absolutely let's invite Habitat and have them talk about their need for volunteers and what people can do in that. If what you have to give is land or capital, let's invite our friends from ACLT, and being more expansive with that. I'm thinking actually of a conference structure that I went to recently where they had what they called lightning talks, and every organization that was represented had 5 minutes to come up and just really quick give the skinny on what their organization was doing and then be available for questions after. So in my head, something like that is more of let's shoot wide with this and try and bring in a lot of people who are interested in helping and spread the word and at least build some community and solidarity in town and help people know that these resources exist. But that's where my thoughts stop right now.
I just, I think it was, I'm trying to remember now who actually organized the event. I think it was AMAHT. I think I remember dealing with John Hornick about this. You did run an event like that, maybe 3 years ago. That's partly how I know as much as I do about Valley CDC and well, we already were partnering with Habitat, but and I think it was very well received. It's not that long ago that happened in people's memories. You might want to, I don't know if you're going to continue to do this sort of month by month or every couple of months. You might want to remind people of that and of the wealth of resources to think about, but maybe allow maybe 2 at a time or 3 at a time. I'm being blatantly self-interested here. The ACLT story, I can tell in 5 minutes. Basically, I present what the community land trust model is. We end up owning the land, and the homeowner only has to come up with enough to buy the home, and the basic ground rules that it stays affordable. But the kind of, even to tell you a little bit of the story took more like 20 or 30 minutes, that gives a little flesh on the bones. So I'm thinking of somewhere between what you would do if it was the first time the town had a chance to hear about all of these various players, and having at the opposite extreme only 1 at a time, which might not bring out the same audience. But I think 2 at a time would give time to really put some flesh on the bones of the stories.
I mean, I think somewhere between a lightning talk and 30 minutes of a presentation would be ideal. I mean, I think I like the idea of kind of a resource fair, but I think inviting land trust and habitat would be very different than having, like, say, Craig's Doors or Amherst Community Connections come in, because I think those are different audiences and different outcomes that you're looking at. So I think if we're thinking of more of a, like a mini resource fair, if we're thinking, you know, we could think about it as like a mini resource fair about home ownership, and then it would make sense to have Valley CDC come in too, since their groundbreaking for Amherst Community Homes is at the end of the month. Not saying that this is necessarily going to happen by the end of the month, but just thinking, you know, there are various things in place or in the works happening around homeownership opportunities. So would that, Alex, kind of make sense as a focus, like a mini resource fair for affordable homeownership in town?
Yeah, I think so. I think back to Greg's original point then, if we're looking at a smaller group of organizations being represented, I think that Greg's correct. It's just focusing on what is the through line with all of them and why are we pairing them together in changing who we're reaching out to.
Right. And so I guess if we're thinking about what can you donate versus how can you benefit, that is two separate strategies, but I think they do kind of weave together in that if we're not targeting people to donate, then there won't be opportunities for people to benefit. And I think while some people, you know, I think if you're going through the community homes, you know, they have all these things about how to get, you know, why is my brain blanking? Like first time home buyer stuff and stuff like that, which I'm assuming would also be a benefit to a person who's looking for a land trust home or habitat. And while yes, it is a different, I'm sorry, I just saw new stamps in front of me and they're manatees and that made me smile. I apologize, my brain is on a train and it's going off the tracks. But can those two audiences come together? I think that they can, you know, Greg, you've had your hand up for a while though, so let's hear from you and maybe my brain will.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think the format sort of like audience targeting questions are important to have clarity on, right? You know, and I think if, you know, including both intentionally and again, even if you do an event aimed at donors, you're going to get people who are more interested as beneficiaries or vice versa, right? But regardless, I think if we decide to go with both, you know, really being thoughtful about managing the dynamic would be, I think, very important. One of the things, you know, like one of the things, especially, I mean, really in all like affordable housing stuff is really, you know, when we're talking or communicating with beneficiaries, it's vitally important to be responsible about expectation setting, you know, you know, and to be, because like, you know, I mean, the worst thing that can happen is, you know, you put a flyer up, like, come learn about like, you know, how to, you know, get affordable, you know, an affordable homeownership opportunity. And then like, you know, there's 5 or 6 opportunities for, you know, 500 or 600 families. You know, I mean, that's, I don't think that would happen in the context of an event, but that's the dynamic we sort of have to be responsible about. You know, so point being, working that stuff out's important, you know. I was actually going to sort of talk about content though as well, and kind of riffing off of Alex a little bit, you know, um, the different ways, you know, and thinking more with the one segment of folks who might participate as donors or volunteers or folks giving of, you know, of their time or resources. I think there is, and then listening to Linda sort of talk about, you know, which I've heard some of these pieces before, you know, about the various models they've used, ACLT has used. there might be another way to come at it, might be an interesting sort of exploration. And Alex would have a better sense if there's an academic or two that in town that could speak to this. But to me, getting at talking about the ground lease and the structure ownership, as separated, which is a technical and functional way that ACLT works. Kind of beneath that, there's some interesting, like, economic and almost socio-political dynamics, like, that are really rich, and I mean that if we could find the right person or people to speak to them, but I mean, in the sense that, there, I think everyone is very aware of the sort of output and the end result of our messed up housing system, but there's less common knowledge about the sort of tectonic dynamics beneath that drive it. Everything from market demand to to land value versus there's fascinating stuff there. So that and I guess zooming back to the specifics of ACLT. I think, and I don't know that I would publicly frame the event this way, but I think there is there is one dynamic where we look at homeowners, who have already committed their, committed, part of their wealth to, to this initiative. And I think, there's interesting, there's an interesting dynamic there of just like spotlighting those specific stories. So, if I were spotlighting, I wouldn't necessarily tell the sort of linear history of ACLT so much as like another way to come at it, might be to delve into one or two, specific donors, or, I don't know what the phrase is here, donors or, former homeowners, but to sort of like, explore their motivations and their, and their reasoning and and how it fits into their overall context. And I'm going to land a plane here, but I guess the point specifically that I'm thinking about is, I think there are people in Amherst, many people, not all, certainly not all, but there are many people who, who have been unintentional, but just sort of circumstantial beneficiaries of this incredible growth in property values, and I think the ACLT donors are people who probably on some level have thought critically about that, and have, and I just think there's an interesting constellation, whether it's the sort of like talking about the, the complex economic dynamics beneath that, or like how individuals should respond to that, and I guess there's an interesting, to me, potential opportunity to say, like, actually some of us, not all of us, some of us have some agency to respond to this, and I think highlighting, and it might be interesting, and perhaps it might inspire others, and then just I'll say a smaller thing too, another kind of offshoot theme, which sort of relates, but I think there is an ongoing conversation. I think it needs to become more targeted in town, just about, one of the themes in our draft housing production plan is demographic shift, of senior housing, and of like, homeowners who are stuck in their homes, who would rather be in a senior housing situation, in some cases, or, and at least one of the examples Linda spoke about, reflected that dynamic, and so that's a little more a practical thing, but there might be some richness there too.
Maura.
So those are excellent points, Greg. Yeah, and I think also, ACLT is not unique. The land trust movement has been going on for like 100 years in from rural to urban. There's big ones in Boston. Burlington is a huge land trust, all with similar setups with sharing the land and home ownership I think ACLT is kind of unique in that most of the other ones don't have donors giving their property, but maybe that'll come. And also, you know, there are 9 land trusts being set up in the valley in Western Massachusetts that are all kind of in their infancy. I think Franklin County is a little bit farther along, but so it is part of a general movement to help affordable home ownership throughout the country.
The socio-political dynamics that you talk about really resonated for me, Greg. If I had to just simply characterize what has driven ACLT, sort of what makes people show up for the meetings and work on it, as well as give property, there's a demographic in Amherst. The university grew to its current size. That is a step function jump from having maybe 6,000 or 7,000 students to having in the 20s and then in the low 30s. That happened much later in Amherst than it did nationwide because private education had been so strong, and it took Massachusetts a while to decide to invest in its state university. So we were like a whole generation later, or even 2 generations later than the Midwest in building a first-class flagship campus from what had been a much smaller operation. And the consequence of that is that we're still seeing the first generation that made that change in the university. I was hired in the last year that the university made a step function increase in the size of the faculty and the corresponding in the size, the number of students and the size of the staff. So all those houses in South Amherst that were built in the 60s and 70s, they were built to accommodate a rush of new homeowners that correlated with the building of the university, the build out of the university to its present scale. And all of us going down the years together are kind of communally appalled that what was possible for us as young people is not possible for current young people. And it's sort of, well, you know, it's not just about fussing about the noise of student rentals. It's about the fact that student rentals has driven out the whole economic middle of the town of Amherst. It's the cost, not the drinking on the weekends, that really deeply troubles people. And so we see the reflection of that in people just being willing, as I say, to walk away from that appreciated value. They believe that they're buying a future for Amherst as a town, that it's not going to exist. I mean, the volunteers who serve on the committees now, many of them are in this generation. They look to see who's going to come along behind them, and they see things like the 30% shrinkage in the size of the school-age population, and they say, "Where this can't continue." It's a very interesting dynamic to watch, and for some people that translates into being willing to just make the investment of what in the sense appears to them funny money. I mean, if you don't sell your house that you bought as a starter house for $600,000, then you probably can't get into really comfortable senior accommodations. Or maybe you're worrying about your grandchildren's ability to get college educations. So there's some amount of protection of that value, but there's also a lot of capacity to just invest it in the next generation of people that you don't necessarily know until they come forward to purchase your house. It's quite exciting to watch it play out.
So I guess I'm wondering if it might make sense to send a follow-up email and maybe loop in Habitat and CDC and see if A, we can come to an agreement about, you know, what we can maybe do as a thing and then when that would be. But I'm also just checking with Greg to see if that can be done in an email versus having to wait until the next meeting to have everybody, or would I have to send out an email to plan for the next meeting for?
I think it's fine to send emails to query interest and availability, um, and I think at this point also be transparent about, we're not quite sure like of shape precisely yet, but but it sounds like homeownership, is a theme, and creating avenues for for families. Yeah, I think it's fine to do that outreach, and for folks who are listening, or I don't think we have any other audience members, but so Valley is, Valley has a development side, and technically the Amherst Community Homes piece is housed in the development side. Not technically, literally, it's housed in the development side of Valley. But then Valley also has, separately from the development world, has a home ownership services side, which is where ACLT was partnering with Donna Cabana probably on, and so that's and so probably, depending on which direction we went, it would probably be Donna, I would guess. But but I think, yeah, my guess is they'd be interested in knowing what, I think Donna's probably more interested in the, on potential home buyers, than communicating with donors. I is my sense. That's kind of what her role is. But yeah, we can certainly do that outreach. But I think Habitat might have more well-rounded like relationship to this conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Alex.
Yeah, Allegra, if you're wanting to do that outreach over email, I'm happy to put a motion forward saying that we authorize you to do that, if that would help you feel better about it. And then we'll, okay. Yeah, so I move that Allegra Clark be authorized on behalf of the subcommittee to reach out to Valley CDC and Habitat for Humanity to discuss logistics surrounding a potential upcoming outreach event.
And do I get to second that motion and then we vote? Is that?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
All right, I second. Votes. Alex.
Aye.
And Allegra is an aye. Okay, so I think that will be our plan, and I really appreciate the time that you've given to us today, and it's really exciting to hear about, the different prospects you have in the works, and, hopefully we can partner on letting people know more about it, and maybe getting you more people who are interested in giving you houses or land.
First, we got to finish the ones we have, so.
Right. So
A
we
lot
want
of money to raise, but.
Yeah.
One of the things, if we can circle back to a much earlier point in the conversation, does it make sense to develop a cadre of potential buyers so they're ready to move on an opportunity? That does create a moment when a family is suddenly ready. Sometimes they've prepared, and sometimes, falls happen. An elder person is more suddenly in need of support than had been anticipated, and there's a flurry of activity. And if we just had a few families that we could call that come forward, then we don't need to go through a public sale. But that means there are families out there that are kept waiting. We do, in fact, have a couple families waiting, and that have cheerfully said they would happily step forward when the next opportunity arose. So it's tiny, it occurs in conversations one-on-one. Somebody knows somebody, and they have a kind of metastable, they have a rental, they wish they weren't paying all that money in rent, but most of the time when people are ready to buy a house, they want to move quickly. So kind of developing the social sector who can manage to be patient, but would be there when the moment came. There's one other thing that I don't know what position you're in to act on this, but one of the things that is concern to us is racial equity in our homes. To put it very simply, we don't have any Black people in our homes. We have good working relationships. Maura and Paige Wilder attended most of the meetings of the reparations group. We have a nice conversation going with that group, now disbanded. But the numbers are small and it didn't happen to lead to successful applications. And I'm alert to both the legal nuances that you can't specify that a particular opportunity go to a particular group of people. But I'm also alert to the sensitivity of groups of populations that have seen a lot of promises broken in the past. I'm just curious about where AMAHT is around what can we legally do and what can we effectively do to fully engage the populations that we would like to see benefit. I will say, by the way, that ACLT homeowners are an extremely diverse group, but that's brought by immigrant families who are, prepared to jump in, take a risk, don't have the history of disappointment or mistrust that some other populations have.
That's a really big question and one we probably don't have time to.
I'd leave you with an easy one to think about. Probably nothing we can do in the short term, but I just want to insinuate it into the thinking.
And I think it's important to bring that up, and I think it would actually be good to get some guidance on that, because in another area of my life, we've been having these conversations about how can we specify preferences in terms of, people involved in a committee based on certain, protected class. So I think that might be a big conversation to have in a different, like in a way that.
Not in this forum, but
yeah,
just
I mean, I think it is
we're-
something that the town needs to think about and needs to be open about, especially with all the executive orders that are going on. But
Linda, I have a couple ideas that are kind of separate from this conversation, but I'll drop you a line about a couple of specific things.
so let's see. I'm going to email ACLT with Habitat and Valley Community Development and just gauge the interest. It's my action step. Just writing it down before I forget it. And I think because Greg, you have a time crunch, is that right?
Yeah, loosely. I can go a little longer into 15, but I should probably be done by 10:30.
So I think we have a few other things that we were going to discuss, and you're welcome to stay and listen, but I will be in contact with you regarding putting something together and then reaching out to the League of Women Voters as well, just as.
Thank you. If we can be helpful with your other matters, I'm happy to stay, but I don't want to get drawn into distracting you. As you've just seen manifested, once I open my mouth, you have to shake my shoulder to get me shut up and let somebody else talk.
We're just going to talk a little bit more about other groups that we've reached out to and our guiding mission statement that we're trying to develop for the trust as a whole. So you are welcome to stay and listen. But I think those updates should be much shorter.
I would like to stay and listen. Why don't you just take away my status as a panelist?
All right, I'll do that. Thank you
both
both for
Thank you so
joining
much
us.
for joining us. It was really nice to hear from you. So in terms of my communications with other people, I have reached out to HRC and attended their meeting this month. I don't know what month it is. March. I went there in March. And so they are willing and interested in partnering with us about coming up with at least a list of resources that can be housed both on their website and our website related to tenants' rights.
Can you tell me what HRC is?
Oh, sorry, the Human Rights Commission.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so because I had seen they had done a pretty robust job of coming up with immigrant resources, so I thought that would be another important issue, and that is one of their target areas that they're trying to work on, as well as like discrimination and inability to afford housing for residents in town. So I think we kind of talked about 3 target areas that we'd want to discuss or have resources for, which were, discrimination and looking for housing. So what are your rights in terms of if you're a renter who is a person with a child under 6 and there's lead poison or lead paint laws and things like that, you know, what are the rights that you have as a family renting? What are the rights against discrimination based on protected class? And again, this is somewhat complicated by the fact that the Fair Housing Center in Holyoke is no longer going to be able to look into these sorts of things when there is a discrimination complaint. I'm going to double check because I think there was some money that was released. It's really head spinning to try and keep track of what's actually happening. So as the last time I went to their website, it did say they were no longer taking calls as of March 5th. So sorry. And so that is the getting into housing and like protected status, anti-discrimination rights. Then kind of what are your rights once you're a tenant and in a unit, if there's concerns with conditions, do you have rights in that regard? And yes, you do. But making sure you're going about it correctly. And then what are your rights if you are being asked to leave, in terms of eviction? There's a process. A lot of people
Sure.
just think, okay, I have this notice that says I have to be out in 14 days, but really there's a whole court process that you can go through. So collecting resources around each parts of those, like what the actual laws are and where you can go for help, are kind of where we had been thinking. So we've kind of we're populating a Google Doc together.
Great. Yeah.
And the person from HRC has actually reached out to the offices at the different colleges to kind of see what their off-campus resources are for in terms of how they're supporting their students who don't live on campus.
Yeah, I think that's great. You know, and I think I am interested in specifically thinking about student renter rights in this, you know, as well. You know, I mean, and I think specifically, I think there are some people who might not be aware of, you know, of just code stuff. You know, that you know, and I know inspections folks come across like you know concerning code stuff. You know, where students are starting to aware like I don't have to accept, you know, this leak or this plumbing issue or this, you know, I've never heard of electrical issues, but you know, I'm sure there's different stuff out there and a relative lack of literacy among newer renters. You know, the other thing too, I want to name is voucher holders as a population that it's more nuanced, but it's an important conversation and I think it does have to do with you know with fair housing and renters' rights. And so,
No, I think that's good to remind me of as I am in the rabbit hole of tenants' rights and whatnot, because I think those resources, I think sometimes people also don't think that like the law necessarily applies when you're in a certain group and like
sure,
so
yeah,
and then I think once we've compiled things, and I need to also, I was going to check in with like ACC and Craig's Doors if they already have some sort of pamphlet that's more locally focused made. I mean, John Hornick had something from like 2016 that I can like update and stuff, but it would be nice to kind of have something that's a one pager as opposed to like here's 27 different links to go to. Yeah. So that would be probably a down the road. You know, we're compiling right now, and then it would be nice to condense. Yeah. So that's kind of where we are on that project. And then I did speak with the energy, oh my God, ECAC, the Energy Climate Action Committee, I think is what it stands for. And one of the things that's coming up is the sustainability fair at the end of the month on the Common. I think it's the 26th or whatever that Saturday is of that weekend. And they always have a booth and they have resources available for, you know, in terms of like energy upgrades that can keep your house less leaky and whatnot. So we kind of had talked about how do we, you know, can we focus on maybe some sort of information for lower income renters who are in, you know, can Mass Save go out to them? How do we get landlord buy-in? That was kind of where our conversation focused, which So I'd asked about the landlord registry, and wasn't sure if that a way that we can push out a communication or not.
I'm not sure yet. I don't know. But but I think like probably conceivably, I think yes. I think it's just a question of I just don't know if it like if that tool has. Sorry, I'm finishing up a meeting. I don't know if that tool has. Communication function or if it would need to get like mass communication function, or if we need to get pushed over to something else, in which case that might be tricky. So yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of, I mean, that's where we were. So I think at the meeting, I'll just announce that the sustainability fair is happening, and that Mass Save is a thing that people can look into. And I mean, I think at the very least, I mean, I know when I was renting, we had Mass Save come, but we didn't talk to our landlord, and I don't know if we were supposed to do that, but they came and they did what, they gave us a power strip. It wasn't like earth shattering.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think that they can do it's like this the deeper stuff like insulation and like where you need landlord buy-in, and I don't maybe there's it's probably worth doing research to see what kind of models are out there for incentivization for that kind of thing. But yeah, we did in this in the housing production plan, there is in the most recent version of the goals and strategies, there is a plank or whatever on seeking to maintain the affordability of current units, and utility efficiency is one strategy there.
So I think those are my updates. Alex, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. I apologize. I was hoping I would have a draft of the flyer for us to look at today, but it's still in progress. So I'll have that by our next meeting.
All right.
All right. And I know Grover was the only one who'd weighed in on any changes to the elevator pitch, and that change was to suggest replacing housing developers with housing providers, or developers, land trusts, and others working to create affordable housing. I'm okay with that as a friendly amendment.
Yeah, same here.
All right. I am aware that our next meeting would fall on May 2nd, and I am also a newly aware person that is the day that Wildwood had kindergarten screening, and I have an ingoing kindergartner. I have not yet received my time slot for that. So I am wondering if maybe we can hold our next meeting on May 9th instead. Then let me just make sure that that's a reasonable thing to, would that work for people?
That is fine for me in the 10 o'clock slot.
Is that okay, Alex?
Yep, that works.
Or 10:15. Yeah.
Thank you. So, all right. So our next meeting will be May 9th, and I'm gonna put that in later because I almost just erased
I'm sending you both the change right now.
friend's calendar. And you said 10 a.m. 10 a.m.
Or 10:15, I think. I've got a thing that ends at 10. I usually need a few minutes,
Okay.
but I just sent you the invite.
Great.
Change that in Zoom right now too.
So I think with that we can adjourn, and I appreciate all your time today.
Great. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.